Hi, my name is Autumn Krueger, and this is my article analysis. So, an introduction to my article. I chose to analyze the article entitled Making Up History: False Memories of Fake News Stories. And in summary, this article focuses on an experiment that tests a story's credibility based on its exposure and repetition. And my thesis was that this article was convincing because it shared experiments from other studies, as well as included sources for the outside articles that they chose to quote. Some article points. So it first contains a bit of an abstract where it explains the overall point and intention of the experiment. And it also calls upon several different sources to back up their point that the repetition of untrue facts can cause people to misremember them as true. Illusory truth effects are discussed, in which repeated statements are viewed as more true than new statements. And it goes on to explain the method and design of the experiment, where it provides details of the participants involved, as well as the type of experiment used, which is a two-factor mixed design. And some more article points. The next section is mainly about materials and the procedure. It discusses the type of content the participants were asked to read, and these were excerpts from supposed news stories, which means that they were either true or not. The goal of the experiment is also brought up again on this section. And then the participants rated each story from their own opinion on a scale of 1 to 8, 1 being not at all true, and then 8 being very true. And the following section of the article contained just the results, where it gave like different numbers and statistics based on the results that they found. And then the last section of the article was the discussion, which explains that there was indeed an increased truthfulness resulting from the exposure of repeated news stories, false stories. It also details source misattribution, which is when the participants believed that they heard a certain story from another source, like an outside source. So the conclusion that the article came to was that simply exposing participants to false informations will increase their belief in the false information. And it's also mentioned that familiarity may lead participants to believe that they had heard of these news stories. And this further explains the idea that some people will believe that something has come from an outside source if they have been exposed frequently to this belief. Some experiment information. So this experiment involved 44 participants, and all of these participants were undergraduate psychology students. And then the students were split into two groups, Group 1 and Group 2, they called it. And it included two sessions, Session 1 and 2. From Session 1 to 2, 6 students did not return to the second session, and then this caused a drop to 21 participants in Group 1, and then 17 in Group 2. And the experiment was a two-factor mixed design, as I mentioned earlier, meaning that they were between subjects and within subjects. And the thesis of the article was that information is more likely to be believed if it is repeated, as well as misremembered in the sense that it originates from a source that is incorrect or untrue. So some sources used in this article, it referred to several different sources to help support their claim. The beginning, like the abstract part, contained the highest number of sources, as opposed to, results or methods or anything like that. Many of these sources presented different experiments that were conducted from different people that were conducting them as a way to build off of their main thesis, the article's main thesis. And all of these sources were legitimate, and the experiments detailed were true. They were relevant to the experiment in this specific article, and they supported the idea that repetition can increase the believability of false events. So, deepfakes and memory malleability, false memories in the service of fake news is an article that explains the idea of deepfaking. And deepfake is a relatively new term to describe changing the content of a certain thing, whether it be audio, images, videos, anything like that. And the article explains that deepfakes can be employed to create false memories. And this article helps support my article because it further explains the idea of how quickly misinformation and false news can be spread. Basically, that deepfaking is another way for false news to spread rapidly among the public, and this contributes to the increase of this specific false news. False memory in COVID-19, how people fall for fake news about COVID-19 in digital contexts, is another article I found, and this one's related to the COVID-19 pandemic and the fake news surrounding it. And I think many of us know that COVID-19 was a massive chance for these fake news producers to spread false stories among the public, and many of them took heavy advantage of it. The article explains that people were exposed to a copious quantity of misleading information in the form of fake news. And my article and this article are related because they both explain that when people are exposed to false information, it could cause them to start believing untrue facts, thinking if this information is so widespread and popular, then it must be true, because why else would so many people be viewing it? When in reality, this is not always the case. So my reaction, I was not surprised to find out that repetition can cause false memories or memories from an incorrect source. False memories were actually a unit discussed in my cognitive psychology class last semester, so I did have a feeling that the results would kind of lead towards this conclusion. And I have had a bit of experience with false memories, but it was mostly in the form of manipulation or gaslighting. For example, I was once told that a certain event happened differently than I remembered it happening, and then this was repeated to me over and over until I started to doubt my own beliefs and actually wonder if it really did happen the way that I was being told and not the way that I originally believed it to happen. More of my reaction. So the idea of fake news, while it's a bit alarming how quickly it's shared with the public, it has always been fascinating to me due to the psychology behind it. And to elaborate on this, it's sometimes really just very shocking the fact that simply repetition can cause a wide group of people to believe that something that is completely and entirely untrue. And I can certainly see how the repetition of false news can actually cause people to believe that it truly occurred. So how this article can relate to class is because fake news can spread through the news in many different ways. And this article, I felt, brought to light the idea that repetition is a very quick way to spread misinformation. In our book, Sabrina, that we read, it contained repetition in several different parts. One of these, the largest parts that I noticed was the repetition of the reporter's video of Calvin, because the more the video was shared with the public, the more people began to harass and attack Calvin over essentially just an innocent speaking mistake, him calling Sabrina Sandra instead of Sabrina by her name. And this shows how quickly misinformation can spread. And I had a video to share, but it seems to be taking 30 seconds to load up, so I am just going to say what the video said. So it starts off by explaining that some misconceptions are comprised of disinformation, and these are false information intentionally designed to mislead people. Many misconceptions center on misinformation, false or misleading information that results from unintentional inaccuracy. Misinformation is most often shaped by mistakes and human error, but the specific mistakes that lead to a misconception can be surprisingly varied. And that's what the video basically talked about. It seems like it wants to play now, but why is that not working now? And then my conclusion is that I thought this was a very well written and informative article, and it taught me a lot about the creation of false memories and how they can easily occur, sometimes seemingly out of nowhere. For example, COVID's misinformation. And it appears to not matter whether or not the information is necessarily true. In fact, it only really seems to matter that it's being repeated and spread around in order to cause false memories among people who are viewing or reading it. And that is the end of my presentation. Thank you for watching. And here's my works cited.